In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic, founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. Shilajit is one of the world's most popular superfoods. It's loaded with over 40 trace minerals, fulvic and humid acids, antioxidants, and more. It's a resin or tar-like substance that seeps out of the rocks of the Himalayas at extremely high altitudes, formed from centuries worth of decomposing plant matter and microbial activity, distilled by pure rainwater and pressurized by tons of mountainous rock. In a way, you could say it's kind of like the lifeblood of the earth itself, and we can use it to enhance our daily lives by absorbing its power into our body cells. However, if you've tried Shilajit in the past, you know it's true when I say it does not taste good. And that almost seems like an understatement. Some people say it's like licking an old used ashtray, and some people get a little more descriptive than that. Let your imagination run wild. It's pretty bad. But one thing is for certain. I've tried tons of Shilajit products, and no one has ever been able to cover the flavor, let alone make it taste good, until now. My friends at Organifi just released these new Shilajit gummies, and they actually taste good. They deliver 250 milligrams per serving of pure Himalayan Shilajit. Shilajit's benefits include supporting energy production, healthy hormone levels, performance and recovery, promoting collagen synthesis and heart health, increasing cellular energy, and decreasing fatigue. Shilajit has become super trendy in the superfoods and holistic health world for obvious reasons, and people have long been desperate for a solution to the flavor problem. That's why in the few months since Organifi released these, they've already sold out several times. Visit Organifi.com/TWF. That's ORGANIFI.com/TWF, or just head to the show notes. Take a look at their whole collection, and when you go to check out, use promo code TWF. That code is going to give you a 20% discount on all of their products, and they have a lot of amazing products other than their Shilajit gummies. Find out how these superfoods can help you on your health journey today with Organifi. Kelly Brogan is a holistic psychiatrist, author of the New York Times bestselling book, A Mind of Your Own, Own Yourself, The Reclaimed Woman, the children's book, A Time for Rain, and co-editor of the landmark textbook, Integrative Therapies for Depression. She is the founder of the online healing program, Vital Mind Reset, and the membership community, Vital Life Project. She completed her psychiatric training and fellowship at NYU Medical Center after graduating from Cornell University Medical College, and has a BS from MIT in systems neuroscience. She is, I said that pretty funny, systems neuroscience. She is specialized in a root cause resolution approach to psychiatric syndromes and symptoms. Okay, so We're here today to talk about your new book, The Reclaimed Woman. Kelly, thank you for joining me first off. It's like the weird thing where we're already talking before this, so I feel like I don't have to say like, Kelly, thank you for joining me. Like we already, you've officially arrived. Okay, so we're talking about The Reclaimed Woman. So I'm going to ask a pretty broad question to start. What have you been up to for the last 3 years, and how has your life transformed to distill that transformation into a new material for your audience?
I have apparently been on like quite an archetypal journey that felt like the dumpster fire of my personal life. And now, of course, in hindsight, which I'm sure you can relate to, I look back and I'm like, oh, wow, I was just going through these very identifiable stages of individuation, integration, recollecting my projections, and coming to understand what it is to have incarnated in this womanly body, right? Like just a basic humaning. But it started in 2020, like at the beginning of the pandemic, when I came out guns blazing, like with my activist superhero costume back on, because I had started to like, after my mentor died, Nick Gonzalez, I had started to like sour on the fight. Like, I don't know how else to put it. I had started to feel like this life of fighting, like especially around, vaccine related legislation. And this is miserable. All of us activists are miserable. Our lives are in like shambles. Our relationships are really unwell. And when he passed, I just organically felt like it was time to focus on what felt good in my life and my career. And the only thing that I could find and identify was like the outcomes, right? So like the feeling that I had when there was this celebratory, victorious moment of health reclamation, right? So I would get like a video or an email or a letter, and I would just, my heart would open and I would have tears in my eyes, and I would just feel like, this is the feeling I'm here for. And that's when I started like publishing all of these cases and really focusing on like what's possible. And then the pandemic started, and I just went right back into the old comfortable, like angry activist role, and felt that I was some important person who was here to deliver the truth to, all of the masses who wouldn't know otherwise, like what was going on in the world. And it was only like a few months before I recognized that, I wasn't doing the work I had started to do like in the year or two prior. And I noticed, that's the thing about, doing any degree of inner work, is you start to become your own observer. And the self-consciousness of that is really what you're reckoning with, right? Like it doesn't require anybody else's judgment ultimately. And so I decided that at that point I was going to look for how I was embodying that which I was condemning, right? So
what sparked that though?
It was how, like, I was like, you know how it is. I was like sleepless, obsessively tracking on the computer. I was in a partnership, as you know, at the time where we were both in that energy field. And then, we have our people, our colleagues, like we were just in this mind meld place. And I was pulled completely out of my life. And, I stopped like dancing, just symptoms I couldn't ignore. And perhaps it was some kind of medicine ceremony also that invited me to look a little deeper at what I was doing.
Yeah, because there's shadow work, but then there's shadow work that's like, where am I embodying the qualities that I am railing against in my life?
And so I thought about pedophiles and authoritarians and technocrats and, violent persecutors and, all of the domination, non-consensual domination based tactics of, what I imagined was coming down the pike. Right. And I thought, okay, how am I embodying this? And I found very simple, like low hanging fruit. Okay. So I stopped telling my kids what to eat. I stopped, or like to try something or finish their plate or whatever. And I stopped telling them to clean their room. Not like I was like ever much of a helicopter mom ever, but I just stopped that wholesale. And I re-recorded all of the 44 videos in Vital Mind Reset. Just literally took a weekend. I was like, my energy's a little know-it-all-y, and I'm gonna re-record these. So I did that, and I stepped down as CEO of my company, and I established like a rev share partnership model. Meanwhile, I like didn't consent to anyone on my team. I was like, this is what we're doing. But regardless, I experimented with these ways to acknowledge that I have these very same qualities of imagining that I know better how somebody else should be living their lives, imagining that I have a privileged, maybe superior capacity to assess and ascertain and discern. So that really led me to the Thank You Body rally and shifting back into, okay, it's like that Bucky Fuller quote, like, I am here to create the way forward, so to speak, and not to fight and protest. And I didn't have the terms that I now play with, like the erotic caress of the enemy, but I recognize the veritable obsession that you can fall into as an activist with your identified villain without seeing the mirror, right? Like that Nietzsche quote that says, like, be careful that you don't, my paraphrase is like, be careful you don't become the monster you're fighting. Mm-hmm. And, I didn't recognize, because I have a lot of like fight stress physiology. That should be obvious to anybody who knows me. And when you're in that angry activist energy, you don't often see, maybe almost never see, the blind spot that is the villain energy you are embodying, right? Because the angry activist is playing a zero-sum game. We want blood, so to speak. Like, we want the suffering. I want like pharma to go down, right? Or I want to see heads roll, so to speak, or literally. I want to, see people punished. I want there to be destruction that I deem necessary. And there isn't any effort towards establishing a win-win. It really is that the tyrant, right? Like you end up embodying that, and you tell yourself the story that you're doing it for the greater good. Well, isn't that the story, right? that we're fighting. It's the very same story. It's the very same mirror. I've worked a lot with family constellation, as you know, and I did this one movement, as it's called, with my friend and mentor, Amerly, and she had me stand on two different pieces of paper, right? And this was about another situation, believe it or not, in my personal life as a mom. And one of them was as like a pro-vaxxer, and the other was as an anti-vaxxer, right? So I would stand on the paper and feel the energy of that side, right? And I can do that pretty easily because I've been both in this lifetime already. Right. And what happens with this kind of a movement is, like, when I would stand on initially like my own paper, let's say, as like somebody who is, like over my dead body, kind of energy, it's like this huge, like, fuck yeah, right? And then I go on the other paper, and it's the same energy. Yeah. And then you go back and forth between the papers until it's neutralized. And you resolve, as Jung would say, you hold the tension of opposites, which is, arguably, that's Tantra. This is shadow work. This is the actualization into non-duality. I mean, however you want to look at that particular journey, when you can hold that both energies are mirroring and they're happening somatically inside of you right now, there's a lot less that you need to do, in the world. And so I got to this place where it was like fun and felt almost like mischievous to me to start to celebrate radical, dogma defying health outcomes. And from that place, I just kind of coasted into this plateau in life that I now see a lot of women at least come to, which is like, okay, I'm oriented again. Like the conflicts have softened, but I feel like I'm living behind a glass wall. Like even the good moments feel kind of hollow, and I don't have much of a relationship to like what I actually want because I've spent so much of my energy focused on what I don't want.
Right.
And that fight and flight. And as was the case for so many people, I came to a point in my life where my primary romantic partnership, I don't know how to say it less bypassy, but resonated out of my field and stopped making the sense that it made to me before. And that was the death of a fantasy that I was grossly underprepared emotionally to handle. And yet it had that signature of any initiation that says like, no, you don't take steps back. There's only forward. So get walking, and as I walked into that space, I met like grief and rage, like those kinds of, intergenerational legacy level, huge emotions that feel like they're going to literally consume your entire being. I mean, I imagine a lot of people listening have touched that kind of a space. And it was in a moment of extraordinary despair, like weeks after the end of my marriage, the end of that relationship, that I just started to watch me in my own shit, right? So I had one of those moments where I was able to see myself. I was like, snot and hysterically crying in a ball for like, I don't even know how many days. And I just saw myself and I was like, wow, this is a lot of energy. And there's something about just a little percentage of this that actually feels kind of good. I don't know if anyone has had this experience, like where there's an aliveness that you access when you're in that depth of emotion. And when otherwise, like I would run more numb, right? So if otherwise in my life, I would be more dissociative, more in that sort of numb spectrum, there was something pleasurable about it. And I remember the moment where I was like, I want to do something with this. And I decided to put on music, and I did a little dance as you do. And I had this like little voice that was like, hey, record it. Right. Like it was like this like mischievous, like playful thing. And I did. And I decided to post that on the socials. And, there's lots of people who do that, right? Like, what's the big fucking deal? What I didn't realize at the time was that was my first real experience of emotional alchemy, right? So like really turning towards that which I otherwise was fighting with. I mean, I had been fighting with it for weeks already. I mean, I would like literally was like eating like a date and a matcha every day for like 3 weeks.
Wow.
And I created something from it. And it was almost like my inner girl came online and was like, ooh, this is so fun. Like, look at me. Right. And I believe a lot that women sharing on social media is for the female gaze. I recognize it. I talk to other women. It's like a huge incentive and motivator for a lot of us. And when I watch other women create, dance, sing, sew, paint, I can almost see their little girls, right? Like I can almost feel that. And it's so touching to me. Like I love watching women create what they create. And I did that. And what I didn't realize was that was the beginning in ways of the initiation of what I call and we don't have to use these terms. I know sometimes they can be an eye roll, but like my inner masculine, right? And when I say initiation, it's because that was the beginning of the destruction of my reputation. And my belief is that reputation is one of the highest values for a man, right? And should be. And I actually would go so far as to say that, his woman's role is to guard that reputation. And I didn't fully understand or appreciate that at any other point in my romantic history. And I learned so much about the nature of relationships, like through the ensuing years of celibacy, actually, that I almost became my own encapsulated like love story. And yeah, so I lit my reputation on fire. That was the beginning of it. I just kept doing it. And because I had a lot of restriction in my own, what I call permission field, like I was allowed to be the credentialed, intelligent, conservatively dressed, like perfectly eloquent, intellectual. I had all of these dimensions of myself that were other things and polarities of those things: stupid, lazy, embarrassing, attention seeking, flamboyant, like, I don't know, seductive, whatever. I had all those aspects of myself hidden. And so what I believe is the pushback. I mean, I lost 100,000 newsletter subscribers in 18 months.
Wow.
And, social media was just like absolutely like a shitstorm. And it was always the reflection of my own inner shame and my own held beliefs that I see as protecting me, right? So like, what are you doing? You're embarrassing yourself. Get in your lane. Do what you're good at. Like, this is only meant for the privacy of your bedroom or the privacy of your home. Like, get it together. You're having a midlife crisis. You look like you have an eating disorder. I always knew you were a narcissist. Wow, now you're manic, Kelly. Like, it was just this tirade, and like 1 out of 3 of them would hurt. Some of them would just, roll off my back, and some of them would really dig deep. And because I get out my sharp knife of like a tongue very readily, I could have spent infinite days composing retorts, right? And I had yet another experience shortly thereafter of like making my first like comedy video out of what I imagine a woman who listened to what everybody thinks she should be doing would look like, right? So she might start off in, booty shorts and hooker pumps, like dancing on a pole. And she ends up, in a burqa, a white coat, tape over her mouth, and a computer in front of herself, and her hair tied in a bun, and the perils of appeasement, essentially. So I had fun with that. And I just felt this reclamation of my aliveness, right? It was like the little aliveness that I touched in the shame that was just alchemized into creativity. And it was fun. And that was an early introduction that I had to this lifestyle practice, this way of being that has informed my experience of, I don't know, wholeness, as a woman. And not that I've arrived there, but it's an orientation towards my life where every single judgment, every single complaint, and judgment of me or by me, every single complaint, every single accident, every single repeated pattern that I just am so fucking sick of, like all of these are now like, ooh, like I'm going in, and I know how to go in. And what I have found is that you can do all this sun gazing and urine looping, and you can even do all the plant medicine, and you can do all the therapy, and you can do so many of these health promoting, wellness oriented practices. But if you have sex and body related shame, which P.S. we all do, okay, by the nature of our enculturation, your level of vitality and your experience of peace, your capacity to create and trust yourself will be fundamentally limited. So my definition of health expanded from, a comfortable, energized body, right? That is pharma free, to an experience of eros as vital force animating the body that really requires going into the caves and coming out with these gems. And so I started to curate practices that are high yield and also practical. I'm a single mom. I run a business, like I run a household and all the things. I'm not spending infinite hours, working on myself. In fact, I work on myself for discrete seconds, like 90 seconds. And then the rest of it is a reorientation and prioritization of creativity, intuition, pleasure, play. I didn't have space for that. I didn't understand like why that would be anything other than like a window dressing to my life before. And especially as a mom, the fulfillment that I have accessed through my relationship to my daughters, and they've felt that, I know that they have felt the shifts in me that were not available when I was in codependent, romantic dynamics, when I was lying to myself about myself, when I was hiding from myself and curating and performing and managing what it was that I was showing my intimate, friends and partner, and let alone the world. And I had no idea I was doing all of that. And the only symptoms, the only way that I now can see, oh yeah, I could have known, and allow me to share what the symptoms are that I felt like I was living behind a glass wall in the good moments of my life. And I felt riddled with resentment and bitterness. That's it. Right. So that's why now I focus a lot on resentment. Disappointment is another one. And bitterness as like portals, like truly, I don't mean that like poetically, like truly portals to energy, and surprising, like delightful plot twists in your life that are not possible to access through linear intention.
Man, there are so many threads that I want to pull on there. That's why I'm like taking notes over here on an iPad. Like, oh, dang, I want to pull on that thread. I want to pull on that thread. The one thing that you mentioned there at the end with these so-called negative emotions and negative experiences or negative aspects about our shadow self being a portal, in as best detail as you can you describe what that looks like for you to go deep into those, individual experiences?
100%. So if I have a gift, it is to consume, I feel like you have this gift as well, but to consume just massive quantities of information and curate like a boss. And I've done that my entire career. And I'm not sure I've ever had an original idea. I mean, I'm a wordsmith, so I love to come up with alliterative terms and phrases, but I am not here to, peddle my methodology or to have my patented approach, reach the hands of millions. I am interested in doing what I imagine most people who might benefit from what I have to share are telling themselves they don't have the time to explore. And so in this 3-year window we're referencing, I don't even know how many thousands of hours I tried on, explored, studied, was mentored by, experienced these different approaches to self-reclamation. And what I mean by that always is finding parts of yourself that you have given away to institutions, to people, to identities, and plugging them back in so that you can experience more of the aliveness that otherwise would be held in conflict and tension with these parts of yourself out in the world. Okay. So I have identified what has worked for me, meaning that I actually do this and live this and practice this. Okay. So I'll give you an example and I'll tell you some of the phrases that I have. I love having these anchor phrases. So one of them is enter through the upset. So I literally will remind myself. Okay. So it was like 2 days ago. I went to one of my favorite dance classes. Normally I can go there in a mood and leave on a cloud. It's very alchemical for me and it's pretty reliable. Didn't happen this time. So I left and I felt just kind of like agitated. I felt like this tension in my chest and I could have just gotten on my computer, as many times I do, and distracted myself, gotten into the wormhole of the billion things, and enter through the upset. That's the phrase. So I hear that phrase and what I do is literally sit on my couch. So instead of going to my computer, I sit on my couch and I set a 90-second timer for me. You can set 3 minutes, you can set 10 minutes, you can set 10 seconds or 30 seconds. And, we can talk about different somatic approaches to big feelings. Like when it's like, you're really in the shit, you might recruit some slight modifications to this. Okay. But this is just like run of the mill, like not sure I really am like digging this human life at this moment. Like, this sucks. And I might've called that, right? Like if I was going to use psychiatric terms, like I might've called that pattern, that somatic pattern, like anxiety. So like I felt that, whatever that, and who knows what that means. It means something different to all of us. But for me, it meant that like fluttery, clenchy feeling in my chest and something like stuck, like it just felt stuck. And I just felt like, like that. And I'm like, ugh. So I sit down, I set the timer for 90 seconds and I just track with my attention the sensation. Okay. So what helps, the hack for me, and we can talk about other terms that I use like self-husbanding, but what helps me is to imagine like a high integrity gentleman, right? Who has this devoted gaze, right? And he's just super solid, got a strong spine. And he's like, what do you got for me, baby? Okay. And I offer that attention, curiosity, interest, and total presence to myself. Okay. So, but I play that little trick because otherwise I could get easily lost in thought. But if I'm playing the part of that inner husband, you could say father, you could say masculine, you could say yang, whatever you want, animus. But if I'm playing that part, I can orient, right, to the theatrics of it almost. I can like fake it till I make it. So I'm like watching the sensation and it's here in my chest and then it drops and it goes down here. And all I'm doing is like, I see that. I see that it's moving there. I see that it's here. I see that it's kind of sharp. Ooh, I see that. I see that. I see that. So I'm like attentive. Okay. And this is where, if you have a history of meditation, it is a lot easier, right? So any history of like, we're just talking 90 seconds. Okay. This is not like some deep Vipassana. So I'm watching. Invariably what happens in the space of minutes is that there will be an alchemical event, right? A transformational, transmutational event. But we don't know that because we were raised, calm down, stop crying. I'll give you something to cry about, right? Like, so we never watched the full experience, the full arc of these emotions to see that you start crying, you feel like you're going to die from crying, and then you're literally laughing. But most of us didn't get there because we were conditioned away from the full natural history, right, of each of these emotional arcs. So I sat there, I watched the sensations, they're moving, no story. That's the hardest part. I'm not like, oh, wow, what does that mean? No, there's no story. And that's
just the emotions, not the
discipline,
thoughts.
Right. So that's where this yang discipline comes in. Like you're showing up like the custodian, the steward of this. Okay. So yeah, so it moves down. I feel it. It's kind of boring actually, like weirdly to watch it, but I'm faking interest, right? So like you got to fake it till you make it in this kind of a practice. Okay. I'm still here. And all of a sudden I hear my heart hurts. Like that was the phrase like that came to me. And this is so common because when I talk to women about this and coach women in this, like it almost always happens. There's like a little phrase, a little something. I'm not a big memories girl. I don't remember most of my childhood, so I don't often get delivered those, but you might be, right? So you might get an image. I just got that phrase, my heart hurts. And I started crying, right? So I don't know what I'm crying about. My heart hurts. Like it just fucking hurts. And I cried for 3 minutes. I don't know. I wasn't timing at that point because the 90 seconds was up. And then I got up and I went on with my day. And I felt different. So that shift I offered myself. What sometimes happens in those moments of entering through the upset is that I'll get like a creative impulse, right? So I told the story about the dancing. I might get an impulse to like, go eat a certain thing. That might not feel creative, but it's these biological impulses. It's these intrusive images or thoughts. Like, I might get an impulse about somebody to contact, right? Somebody to send a text to, or some, something to buy or something to draw or something to, right? So these seemingly random, like easy to ignore, almost like a dream that you're like barely able to remember, but you could just grasp a little of it, like yank it, right? So like yank it because there's something in there and you pull that thread and it'll take you someplace really cool. So when you enter through the upset, it's just that somatic minute to 3 minutes. Then, so I like to break it up this way. Feel it, face it, free it. So that's the feeling part. Then if you're in a thing, right? Like, let's say it wasn't that random, quote unquote, experience that I just described. And let's say you get an email, from a family member or an employee or an ex that activates your somatic sequence, right? So you get like racing heart and hot flashes, and you may be somebody who's like, fuck this, and you just close the computer and you're an avoidant, or you may be somebody who's more like me who like needs to send the urgent, I'll show you email. And instead you're going to enter through the upset. You're going to do what I just described. Okay. And then you might do this very basic practice that I call wearing the villain crown, right? So somebody said this shit about you, right? They say, I can't believe how self-absorbed you are, for example. And right, old me, old us, because we're all doing this work in some way, shape or form, might have been like, me? Like, how about you? And then, like have all of these defenses in mind. And you enter the erotic caress of the enemy through that portal, right? So instead, you have the opportunity to try on the possibility that what they're saying is in the privacy of your own moment, that what they're saying might be true, right? Because it wouldn't bother you if a part of you didn't agree. Okay. So if a part of you thinks that you might actually be self-absorbed, maybe you were called self-absorbed as a kid or selfish, right? And that part has been holding on to that, saying, we got to make sure nobody ever sees this, because when I was called this as a kid, it was bad and it resulted in loss of love. So I'm going to do anything I can not to be perceived this way. And that's what that trigger is, right? Like we know the word trigger. That's what that is. It's the warning from a benevolent protector that says you're going too close to the flame, like back up, come up with your story, come up with your defense, like make sure you're right in this moment. And so instead you're going to wear the villain crown and you're just going to be that bad, wrong person. And you're going to let that accuser have their experience of you and just try on, is it possible? Right. So like I share in my book, and I've shared elsewhere, that like one of the worst things I've ever been told, and I've been told many things, was that I am a deeply injured soul who is incapable of love. And it was like the gut punch of gut punches years ago when I was told this. And it was the first experience I really had of this practice within myself, because when I held, okay, so I entered through the upset, I held that sensation instead of acting. I held the sensation, it moved, then I could just consider the possibilities. Okay, so like, I'm a deeply injured soul. Yeah, like I am, actually. I am for sure. A part of me believes that. Up for sure. There's a part that is like, I am irreparably fucked up and damaged. Like, and if people could know, right? Like, that's why I ended up on that side of the psychiatrist's desk, not that side. So nobody would ever know, like, just how fucking crazy and fucked up I am, right? So there's, for sure, I actually believe this part is in every woman. I won't speak for men, but like, I've spoken to enough women who have a part that believes they're just beyond salvation crazy. Okay, so maybe that's true. And incapable of love, at that time, I was delivered that accusation that was actually true. Why? Because I was capable of codependency. I was capable of, meaning giving to get, okay? And I was capable of manipulation and strategy. And I was capable of many sophisticated defenses that served to protect me from the scariness of rejection and abandonment and betrayal. Like, that's what love was to me. I didn't know because I didn't know myself. Like, you can't love somebody when you don't even have the slightest idea who the hell you actually are. You haven't looked at the parts of yourself that you would rather not have or be associated with, let alone be. Okay. So yeah, that was kind of true too. So like in that, I don't know, literally 2-minute practice, like it drained all the energy out of this horrific thing. Right. And I was able to say, like, I don't know, maybe I'll consider that. Right. So like in myself. And, you know, the opposite I have found very powerful too, because we hear a lot about like transcending judgment, and, you know, how judgment is like cast in the value-based polarity of good and badness, clearly in the bad camp, right? Judging is bad. And I don't know about you, but I judge all day, every day, probably every moment. And what do I do with myself if I've decided that's a bad thing that bad people do? That's like quite a bind, right? And generates shame and what I call a shame wall to justify, defend, or maybe hide the part of me that is charged with and responsible for judging others. Okay. So let's say I feel like I'm in the position of judging somebody, and I feel like, God, she's so lazy. Like, what is she doing with her life? Right? Like the moment, and it helps to have a community and friends. Like my girlfriends, we live this life. So if I come, you know, trying to shit talk someone to one of my friends, like literally her response will be like, and in what ways do you feel like you're embodying that? Like, actually, like Tara will say that to me. And so it's no
Tara,
fun.
so that sounds about right. Yeah.
It's no fun anymore to shit talk. And I was raised on shit talking. Like I was raised that that's actually how you connect. You complain and, you know, commiseration, connection. So if I feel judgy about somebody, then I might look at like, how have I restricted my own permission field? How am I not allowed to be that? And there's a part of me that like kind of would like to be like that person, right? Or get away with it, right? Versus like imagining that somebody should be punished for being who they are. So that restricted permission field we meet when we, especially as women, judge other women. So, you know, woman on woman hate is a very real enculturated phenomenon. It's an extension and product of, in my opinion, the feminist movement. And we become very atomized because we're competing with not only men, but we're competing also with women because we are steeped in the zero-sum game victim consciousness that says, I am right about how wronged I am. And in that space, you're constantly, it's a survival mechanism. You're constantly assessing, like, how am I superior or maybe inferior, but how am I, relative to these other women, relative to that girl or that woman? How am I faring, right? Like, how safe am I and how can I strategize? So judgment becomes this means of protecting oneself, and you can work with it, right? Like, you can wear your own villain crown, meaning that you become the one who is that thing that you say is bad. So really growing your capacity to experience yourself as bad and wrong is the greatest flex of the reclaimed woman. I mean, it is the practice, and it takes minutes. Like, literally, this is not some, there's no real protocol here. It's a mindset, it's a worldview, and it's a philosophy that says my energy is in the taboo. So that which is bad and wrong, I'm going there. And I'm going to turn all of the pain bound up in that into my own pleasure. And what irrepressibly arises through this practice is literal delight. It's laughter, it's connection, it's permission, and you get to be the kind of woman that you told yourself and you allowed so many others to tell you you're not allowed to be. And then you start to have these, micro enlightenment experiences of being yourself, even as you're not yourself, small s, right? So you start to make contact with this deeper core of selfhood that is resilient, that's not bound to, Kelly, the pedigreed doctor activist, right? So, like, if I'm not that, and maybe I'm Kelly, the midlife crisis pole dancer, and I'm still here, I'm still like standing, I'm okay, then I have so much more creative bandwidth. It's just that midlife experience that has been so maligned, where you get to recognize you've been living a script and now you get to write it, which is actually can be totally paralyzing and overwhelming to work with that level of personal responsibility and choice. So it doesn't happen until you're ready, for that adventure.
Yeah. Man, again, more threads that I want to pull on here. This is great. The thing that comes up for me in all that you're saying is, like, this is again like a running joke on this podcast, how much I bring up my water fast, is that,
oh my God, me too.
Well, yours for the wrong reasons. Like, you had a horrible experience.
I'm still metabolizing that one.
Well, for me, it was a great experience. And I think for the most part,
because you're a man.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
I think it's meant for men for the most part. And I've said that before. But for me, I had to just be present with my thoughts and just feel them. And, I always liken it to animals and what happens with animals in nature. And a friend of mine, Jesse Elder, just covered this on an episode we did. And an animal, when it experiences a traumatic event, it shakes somatically, and then that experience is gone from its psyche, supposedly. I think that's correct, right? But we tend to hold on to these things, and it's just so interesting how simple this practice is for you to help resolve something. And I'm convinced that those people who suffer with chronic anxiety or, quote, chronic depression or some other, quote, chronic condition, even chronic physical things, just never fully felt the original thing or the original things. It's just that they have this subtle sort of lingering background underlying anxiety because they never felt the true feeling to its completion. And if they would just do that, that, quote, chronic issue would completely dissolve.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Freud called it repetition compulsion. Caroline Elliott calls it existential kink. It's the invitation to complete. Maybe that's what we came here for, right? That play of busting into a million fragments and then picking them all up through the very personal path of our own adversity and these experiences that we have that cause these ruptures because we don't, right? So Peter Levine has established somatic experiencing. He talks about trauma as being, an experience that was not borne witness to appropriately, right? Like, so when you experience horrible shit, but if you have a compassionate ear, it does not lodge in your tissues in the same way that if you are in isolation, attempting to make sense out of your own victimization, right? And they carry that. I mean, there are so many. I mean, now there's probably a million sophisticated ways to explain how we hold this resonant phenomenon, right? Like Eileen McCusick and others would have very sophisticated explanations. But back in the day, even Candace Pert, who wrote Molecules of Emotion, right, talked about how these are, I know molecules aren't a thing. Okay, so we'll give her a pass. We're giving her a pass.
I saw the smile on your face when you said that. I was like, is she? That's funny.
We're giving her a pass because she's a bench researcher who was talking about how these are stored. These are stored in your tissues. And here's, how we are observing that. Yeah. And then what is illness? Is it just, right? So obviously, I talk about German medicine and there's so many beautiful frameworks, but, the short of it is that, like, is it the invitation, right, to change your story? And to change your story, you have to adopt a worldview that meets your needs in ways that are currently being met by your victimhood, right? So or your addiction, these things work, they meet needs. So we're like, why doesn't that person change? Why don't they get their shit together? Because it's working. It's working enough. But right, that's what these ruptures are about. And that's why I've always been fascinated by crisis. Right, isn't that the Chinese characters apparently mean like crisis, danger and opportunity, right? So this moment, it's a choice point. And that's why the individuation journey, the heroine's journey in The Reclaimed Woman, I deconstruct the tale of the handless maiden. So not Handmaid's Tale, different thing. The handless maiden is like the archetypal heroine's journey that begins with a father who unwittingly sells his daughter to the devil because in exchange for all the wealth in the world, he's like a struggling miller. And in exchange for all of the wealth in the world, he just agrees to give this stranger what's behind his home, like in the dustbin behind the house. And he forgot, that his daughter always plays there. And so, he ends up selling his soul. And it's called by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, whose interpretation I absolutely love and feature throughout the book, the poor bargain, right? So he makes a poor bargain. And a poor bargain is something that most of us, I would argue, especially women, are very familiar with because it's the way that we settle for the dress, for the man, for the house, for the job, the way that we settle for the self-depiction, the experience of our own identity, the way that we settle and suppress the awareness of a no inside that is felt. It's a felt experience. Nope. And we suppress the awareness of it, right? So that Miller father, he knew that was too good to be true, right? He knew that, he felt that, and he suppressed that awareness, and he made that poor bargain. And you could argue the consequences of that are the beginning of a reclamation journey. So there's no mistakes, there's no accidents. It's exactly how it's meant to be, and here you go. And so, the rest of it's an extraordinary, like tear-inducingly beautiful story, and very long and complex. But I break it up over the book, and I don't want to spoil it. So, but there's a plot twist at the end, where she has this regenerative experience of the injury brought to her life, right? So he cuts off her hands, the dad, because he had no choice, trying to negotiate with this devil figure. And her regeneration at the end is only after and through many, increasingly familiar dark nights of the soul, right? She goes back into the forest. And so being able to recognize this poor bargain, I think, is one of the most important skills for a woman to develop as early as possible in her life when she might be taking that bait. and if you take it, it's all good too.
Another thing that stood out to me in everything that you're saying is, I'm sure you're loosely familiar with Byron Katie's work, Is It True? And this is like a slight reframe on it that I like, in that it's like, so what if it's true, or what if it is true? And because, what you get to in inquiry is typically like, no, it's typically not true, and you're not going with it. But this is playing with, so what if it is true? And really going into that. And I could totally see where it dissolves the heaviness or the anxiety inducing feelings surrounding that idea that someone holds of you. And go ahead.
And it's absolutely, I mean, I think her work is so profound. I was very, surprised to see, how so many of these extraordinary spiritual teachers went in the 2020 era, because I just consider her so wise. And obviously there are many layers to awareness of how the body plays into this kind of inquiry. But that's an unnecessary aside. What I'll say is, I don't know why I'm fucking about to say that. Because I'm like, I love her, but I also what?
No, yeah. You had the inner process going like, yeah, that was good.
Totally.
That was good.
But the experience, so I, like so many women, I was valued, appreciated, and prized for my productivity, my achievement, and my met goals, right? And success, right? So it works for us. It's almost like a little cookie or something. Like, it works for me and for so many of the women that I work with to know that there's like a gem from the cave, to know that there's like a reward. This is not, you don't do this work so you could be a good person, right? Like, that's not compelling enough, because you already have a good strategy for being a good person. So why would you, right? Like, you don't do it just because it's what people are doing, right? You do it because there's literal fucking superpowers on the other end, right? Like, you do this, you turn towards this judgment, right? You try it on because this is how you level up. You play a different game in your life, right? So it's the hack, right? And to some part of my immature masculine, I needed that, right? Like, that's why I stopped drinking, whatever it was, a year and a half ago. It wasn't because I had a problem or anybody suggested it. I honestly had no consequences whatsoever that were measurable or material. But there was something that I kept circling around. And I now recognize, that I've been in the business of helping women to disabuse themselves of consciousness altering pharmaceuticals. And, I used to love, probably still would, love mezcal and scotch and tequila. And I would go out to dinner and enjoy, like, right, it was like heart opening for me. And I would like love to have a drink at dinner with friends and that kind of a thing. And I would love to cook with a drink. Like, I would, pour myself a mezcal while I cooked, even for my kids. Just one, right? So like, I never crossed any awareness lines where I would have been like, this is getting a little weird, Kelly. The reason that I ultimately recognized I was in some sort of self-betrayal loop was because of the shame that I had, that I wasn't even aware of, that I was doing this consciousness altering thing while publicly, right? Like, proclaiming how important it is for women to be lucid, right? And aligned with yourself. Now, you could argue that my work is, I mean, there's a million addictions. Right. I don't believe in pathologizing addiction whatsoever. But the real, like, choice point was around wanting to level up my game. Like, I wanted to access deeper magic in myself. I wanted to have a kind of intuition and magnetism that was, delightful, right? And I wanted to play a wilder level of the game. That's why I did it. Right. So I had a yes that was magnetic rather than, the avoidance of being the bad person who does the bad thing. That was not sufficient. It's not sufficient for most addicts, right? Those are the white knuckling, sober guys or whatever who are judging everybody who's still drinking because you haven't found your yes, right? Necessarily. But the reason to play that Byron Katie game, it could just be to feel good, right? And she absolutely, I think, has established without, beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can feel better in minutes just trying on these statements like, is it true? Am I sure that it's true? And how do I feel when I believe this? How do I feel when I don't? And then you turn it around and right. So, but if you know that there is creativity, there is literal bodily pleasure, sensation, that there is like little sparks of clarity and intuition, that there are, synchronicities and all of these like spiritual buzzwords that come to you when you just try this. Would you want to try it? Right? Like, would you want to, for a couple seconds, consider the possibility that you're like a stupid, spiteful, lazy asshole bitch? Like, maybe, okay, maybe, right? And even like I've had some practice with my dad, right? So for an example, right, where sometimes he'll send me a very well-intentioned text that he's concerned about like some decision I'm making, about my daughters, like taking them on vacation to Mexico or something like that, right? And I used to just make like sassy, like, oh, I didn't notice I texted you to ask you or whatever, like just sassy bitch. And then I would feel all this charge in my body, but I might ruminate about it for a while and then tell some friends and make sure they saw my perspective and agreed that I was like, so annoying. Why is he still doing that? And these days, a catchphrase I keep in my little kit is, I'll consider it. Like, meaning what you're saying. I'll consider it. Mm. And I love that phrase because it's true. Because I'm fucking considering it. Right. Clearly, I'm considering it. And it feels good to be considered. And that's actually what's happening anyway. And I'm going to consider it. I'm going to allow your reality to exist even as mine does, which is called individuation, right? That's right. Called adulting. And the way that simple concept has transformed my mothering cannot possibly be overstated. I have just in time with my daughters, recognized every opportunity to allow their reality to be different than mine and to lean in. And that is the cycle ending. It's not the plant medicine and the ecstatic dancing and the cacao ceremonies and all this, the trappings of a different life than my mom and my mom's mom and my mom's mom's mom lived, which is what I thought I was doing. Right. When I would like drag my kids to, ecstatic dance circles on a Sunday or whatever, and feel good about myself if I could look around the room, we were all like dancing around or whatever I thought. And meanwhile, I was beginning to encounter ways that my daughters were not buying into the same belief system that I had decided was non-optional. Mm. And it was non-optional because my sense of self was predicated on being seen by them and valued by them as the woman who's done the work for our mother line. And in the early indications I got that maybe they didn't see it that way, I could barely tolerate that. And I learned from my first experience of holding the internal protest that said, daughter, you need to see my perspective and understand my perspective. You're potentially totally wrong about your differing opinion. from the first experience that I had of that, my intimacy, like what is intimacy, right? So my actual intimacy with my daughters, probably within that afternoon, began to deepen and shift. And I just 2 hours ago, I had an experience, because it's like every single programmed, dogmatic, reflexive, power over parenting move that has crept into me, right? It started with food, right? You must eat this way, because my kids are teenagers now, right? So there's a point at which you as a parent, not you personally, but a parent will recognize an opportunity to create the conditions for sovereign love, right? To create the conditions for love that, crosses the bridge of difference. And for me, it started when my eldest was around 13, I would say late 12, 13. And it started with tech when she asked for an iPhone, when I was like literally myself not on an iPhone for 2 years. And, then food restrictions, because I've not had a lot of rules, but when it comes to holistic mothering stuff, I was extremely rigid. Like my kids literally never ate birthday cake or pizza at a party in their lives, period. Okay. And then extended to, what about like sexuality? And, my eldest has had a boyfriend for a year and a half. Like, how does that work? And I had all of these very reflexive, like, make sure you leave the door open a crack, kind of thing. Like, what is that actually coming from? And yeah, just even a few hours ago, I feel like I moved through one of the last bastions, because my girls, I trust them. I trust them to stay with themselves, to align with their inner yes and their inner no. And otherwise, at what point is that experience of self-source navigation conferred? We don't have initiatory ceremonies, right? Like, when does that occur? When they go to college, right? It doesn't. And that's why in our 40s, some of us are trying to, own our no and align with our yes. So, I've had like a no sleepover rule. Like my kids have not been allowed to sleep over anybody's house their entire lives. And I have many well thought out reasons for that, right? And I literally just got off the phone with my daughter before coming here, and we just had this like very, thoughtful, sensitive conversation where I was like, listen, like, I have chosen to take on this role of protector, which is arguably, if I were in relationship still with her dad, I would not be in that role, arguably. And I'm not, so I am. I choose to. And I also trust you. So I'm feeling, like this internal process. I just want you to know that, because I know you want to go to the sleepover this weekend with your friends, and I don't want you to go. And I also I'm sensing that I'm trying to control you. Like, that's what I'm, if I'm honest, like, that's actually just for the sake of it, right? Like, just putting up that boundary so that I can feel like I'm the mom, whatever. And it was a beautiful conversation. And that's how every conversation, we don't have, I don't have conflict with my kid, but there's no like power dynamics. There's no games. It's just the best. It's just the best. Like, it is just the best.
If you're enjoying this episode, please consider sharing it with at least one friend or family member who you think could benefit from hearing it. You help us grow and reach more people by sharing it with those around you. Also, be sure to head to the show notes to check out our membership offerings, membership marketplace, and more. We all know that Big Ag is poisoning our food supply, and Big Pharma's so-called medicine is straight up poison. What most people aren't aware of, though, is that most supplements are also filled with artificial sweeteners, dyes, GMOs, glyphosate, and a host of other toxic ingredients, even many of the more natural supplements. My good buddy James Benefico dedicated his life to crafting the world's cleanest, most nutritious organic supplements after a pre-workout energy drink caused heart palpitations so severe that he almost landed up in the ER. Organic Muscle was born, revolutionizing sports nutrition by using exclusively non-GMO ingredients from USDA organic farms. Since then, tens of thousands of people, including myself, have leveled up their fitness and their health with Organic Muscle's award-winning natural pre-workout. There's no jitters, no heart palpitations, no itchy skin, just nourishing organic food and herb-based ingredients for clean, sustained energy, strength, endurance, and recovery. Numerous studies have shown that Tonka Ali is the most effective herb in the world for naturally boosting testosterone levels. And we know that testosterone levels are depleting all over the world because of what's put in the food supply, what we're exposed to. Organic Muscle has the world's first fully organic Tonka Ali supplement. I only support and promote things that I actually use, and I can say I legitimately use Organic Muscle products. Use code FORWARD15 at checkout for 15% off at organicmuscle.com. Well, I have some questions related to this actually, because I'm a dad of a 6.5-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and so,
cutest humans.
Thank you so much. I guess, what is the appropriate age? And of course, you're not going to be able to apply like, oh, by age 8, this, and this, or whatever, right? But at what point do you start giving a little more room for them to make their own decisions related to nutrition and things that may or may not be harmful, and choices surrounding that? Because we are charged, especially in a more masculine role, like as the protector and the provider, and the mother role is like the nurturer. So how do we navigate that with letting them have their experience?
If I had it to do over, I would say from the get.
Really?
From the get. And I'm not saying they want Cheetos, you buy Cheetos, right? So you are creating the conditions for this household for a window of time, a short window of time, let's say 17 years. Okay. And you go ahead and you create those conditions, meaning like you put certain things in the fridge, you turn the Wi-Fi off at night, like you have the air purifiers, or whatever you do in your household that feels in integrity for you, you do that. And you interest yourself whenever, your child has a desire that is outside the bounds, has a request, has a curiosity, like, how come like we don't eat Domino's pizza inside the house or whatever? You could reflect, and this reflex is, I still do it. It's so challenging to create a space between that question and the reflexive defense that says, I'm going to explain to you why, right? I'm going to tell you, here's why. I have all my reasons, right? And I'm constantly getting on that soapbox with my kids about like dominant reality narratives and like, well, do you know about this? And I bet you never heard about this. And it's not the way. I've tried it that way. And there is another opportunity. There's another option, which is to, I like, again, a phrase to say, tell me more. That's it. It's a meta. This is a meta thing. This is not how you're going to like create and crystallize all of your parenting rules. This is how you're going to remain in connection to your kid when it's very tempting to power over them because you can't hold in your own body the distress that arises when they are expressing their own individuality. And that's what most rules come from. Okay. So like some of the lingering rules were that I turn the Wi-Fi off at 9 p.m. in the house. Like I have, that kind of a button. And, that there's no tech like phones or whatever in the car or at meals. And I used to pretend that those were like agreements, but they weren't. They were just rules. That's how I wanted it to be, because when I felt into it being different, I couldn't handle in my system. I couldn't hold it. So if we're honest that that's what most top-down rules come from, then there might be a little flexibility that, invites self-exploration, right? So like, what am I really worried about? What do I really think is going to happen? What am I transmitting? right? Because my daughter, my youngest, said to me not too long ago, she's like, Mama, you're afraid of so many things. And here I am thinking like I'm some kind of fucking Joan of Arc. And, all these people tell me how courageous I am. And my daughter, out of the mouths of babes, is telling me how scared I seem, right? Of like, of pharma and chemtrails and EMFs, and you know how that list goes, right? So if what I'm transmitting is fear versus like, this is how I love this vessel, right? Like, this is how I love this body. Like, am I living what looks like a pleasurable life? Like, am I having fun? I started to recognize, and this was actually my embrace of wealth. That's a whole other conversation. But I started to recognize that I was not doing a very good marketing job on the sovereign life. Okay. Like, I was not selling it well to my kids who saw me like, pulling out documents every time I wanted to go mask free into a store and like gearing up for the fight. And I'm not saying I would do it differently necessarily, but there is an intention and a motivation that, if it is not examined, can be a poison,
right,
with the best of intentions. And doesn't that remind us of something, right? So it's
right.
again, that mirror. So,
well, real quick on that point too, is that goes full circle back to what you were talking about with the traditional health freedom activist role, is that I don't want to say they in an overarching like
capital T.
Right. Yeah. But overwhelmingly, people who embody that role are not embodying a more attractive way of being for those that they're trying to help, quote, wake up.
No.
Right?
No, we're not being the change
Right.
we want to see in the world. No. And that's why if you look at it through the resonance, lens, and you say, what's the vibe here? Like, what does this feel like?
Right.
That's when I recognize the role of victim consciousness in allopathy, right? So you think about a pharmaceutical, and you can recognize that every single pharmaceutical has the potential anyway to perpetuate exactly that which it purports to resolve. And could it be that fighting the valiant fight? And I've had so many people tell me how much I helped them. Okay, so I'm not saying that that's bad and what I'm doing now is good. I am not saying that. Trust me, I have long ago resolved the illusion that I am a better person, a superior person than I was when I was prescribing. I don't believe in that. I just have more awareness. And I feel like I have more choices. That's it. Okay. So when I was in that fighting posture, is it possible that I was perpetuating that which I was seeking to resolve? And is that the definition of what victim consciousness does? It is this parasitic energy that needs more and more and more of the suffering, of the pain, of the struggle, of the frustration and the resentment, and all of these like potent but arrested negative, quote unquote, emotional states, fertile emotional states. It just feeds off of that, right? So when you're in your victim, what's the first thing you do? You complain to somebody else, and you try to induce in them to transmit. It is the contagion, right? You transmit what it is that you're feeling inside so that you can have help regulating your system. I don't know how else to look at it, right? So when I look at it that way and I think about, okay, with the best of intentions, was I growing a field of victim consciousness in my household? And what does sovereign consciousness feel like as a mother? What does it look like? And what does it ask of me? Well, what it asked of me was that I lose something I thought I would die without, which is my identity as an expert in my children's health and well-being. Right. And I would argue that most holistic moms, whether they have a microphone or not, fancy themselves, right? And I'm just speaking as a mom, I'm sure you can relate, like fancy, right? Fancy ourselves. We identify with our rightness, right? Like, what if at some point we find out, I don't know, that
viruses exist.
No, let's not go that far.
Oh, that's a step too far, Alex.
Right. No, I was thinking of a much more mundane example, which is like, okay, so my girlfriend sent me this video recently about how like it's a whole psyop that peanuts are bad.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And it was like this, I was like, what? What if peanuts are not actually bad for you? I was like,
fucking love peanut butter though, so
everybody
I mean,
fucking loves peanut butter.
Right.
What if it's not true that it's bad for you as
Right.
The aflatoxin, as a legume, like
Totally,
whatever,
totally.
blah, blah, whatever.
The mold that's in it,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
another thing too. So
Right. So I'm just using that as an example. What if we wake up on a Wednesday and it turns out we were wrong about that thing? Imagine all of the insistence that was required to hold that certainty. And that energy can come from a place of requiring that somebody else concur, requiring that they agree. So we don't actually need anybody to agree when we're solid, right? Well, you know that. Like if I know what I know about the nature of illness, you can believe whatever it becomes more and more cool over time. You feel me?
Totally.
Like, you've lived that. I've watched you and you've watched me. Like over time, we're sort of like, you do you, bro.
Totally.
Right?
It's not where I was like a year and a half ago, but now
exactly.
I'm just like, I don't care.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Even someone asked me if I wanted to debate someone on it, and I'm like, no, I just don't.
I mean,
have
but
the
for
desire
sport,
to.
but like not because it actually matters, because you're not attached to the same extent anyway, to the shared reality. And most of the health related, wellness related, holistic mama things I was doing, I needed my children to agree. And there was just a point, and I don't know how to prescribe this point or help anybody identify it other than to say, there may come a time where there is a big, I need you not to do that. Right? There's like that big charge around something that your kid wants, believes, values, that flies in the face of what you do. And what I would like, sort of, I don't know, in my tales from the trenches, as I say, like what I would like, hey, try to recognize that and just take a minute, be like, I'm going to be right back. Go to your 90 seconds, hold yourself, come back and say, you were saying, like, I want to know more about that. Tell me. Right. And it comes up sometimes you can practice in stupid ways. Like, my daughter will be like, Mama, I like her outfit. And I maybe don't like her outfit. So I'll be like, I don't like it. I don't like that style of jeans. And it just comes out. That's what I'm saying. Like you'll be able to at some point insert the like 3 to 5 second pause where you don't just say your opinion. You don't just declare how you think differently. You don't just assert yourself, because it's actually like more fluid. It actually feels okay if you just listen, right? And it sounds, I mean, maybe I'm dating myself because I know, your generation, if I could say, no, dude, I'm way older than you. You just start getting it. We're just so
like
baked
that,
in our
like,
shit, my generation, it's like, we've had a lot of work to do. We do still. And so maybe I'm saying that this is challenging. Maybe it's not for many people, but for me to not reflexively just impose my reality on my children has been the ultimate spiritual practice for me. And I'm telling you the dividends, again, this is like my little competitive inner, dude who's like, what's in it for me, and the dividends are immediate.
Really?
Immediate. It's so worth it. Just like practice wearing that villain crown, practice being wrong. You think it's going to cost you respect. You think it's going to cost you stature. You think it's going to cost you a sense of dominion over, as a woman or a man, your children in this household. And it is like, that is the inversion. It's like literally what comes is what you've wanted the whole time, which is like I know it makes me want to cry, which is like a sense of, like, I fucking love you. I see God in you. Like, I'm here with you. It's like such a journey. Fuck.
Well, I think this is coming up because you just had that like final experience
I
today
know.
with
It's
your
like the
daughter.
sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
I know, because
amazing.
I watched myself do it and I was like, no sleepovers. What I
Yeah.
literally texted, I was like, sleepovers are a karmic vortex. Who says that? First of all, what does that mean? I knew what I meant. I was like, bad shit happens. You don't
Right.
need to. And my rule is like, anyone can sleep over at my house anytime.
Mm.
Right. But I just watched myself just do that, like control for control's sake.
Mm.
And yeah, so it's such
I
a journey.
recognize that in myself with my son sometimes, just for control's sake. And man, one of the things that you said, and you've brought this up a number of times throughout this, so now this is the thread that I want to come back to and pull on, is you talk about your inner guy that does this, your inner father, your inner masculine
Husband.
presence, your inner husband, and being in a sort of celibate reality for the last 3 years, it's sort of forced you to reconcile those parts of you and to make up for those, for lack of a better term, things that are void in your life right now, to fill those voids internally. And that sounds like reclamation and sovereignty to me, but I wanted to pull on that a little more and just discuss what that looks like for you. Well, and I mean that seriously though, because it's like, it is your healing and your well-being. Like, of course we need community. Like I will not say that we should like go at it alone and be by ourselves. You keep on bringing up your girlfriends that you're always with. And I think that's so important, but it's more from a healing context and feeling whole and feeling centered and feeling like more of you, reclaimed. It just makes total sense that you would be able to fill those roles that are absent in your life, or that may have been carried out in a diminished capacity when you were a child, those roles that you needed, whatever. But it just sounds like reclamation to me. So,
yeah. So I often find myself in these zeitgeist experiences. And here I am again, because Bumble, the dating app, literally has a campaign, an anti-celibacy campaign right now, because their bottom line is suffering because of how many women are leaving these apps.
wow.
Right? Actually, they have billboards shaming women for celibacy and saying it's not the answer.
What?
No, for real. You can look it up.
That's real? What?
But it's, it's just a marketing strat,
Right.
and it makes sense because it's a response to the fact that I am not the only one. And there are many reasons why a woman might choose a celibate moment in her life. It could be because you fucking hate men and you put them all on the reject pile, or it could be because you recognize that there is like a union of opposites inside that hasn't yet occurred or is occurring, and that is your number one priority. And I know for me, I started to see as I, because of course I had that like early desperate moment that was like, oh, I'm going to make sense out of the pain of this loss of my last relationship, because now I'm going to be in a healthy relationship, and watch me, world, or whatever. And once I got through, that was just exhausting, right? Like I would like walk around the world and be like, oh, is my next husband here? Like, oh, or not? Should I leave? Should I go out to find like,
you'd send me messages saying
total
that
drain.
stuff too.
Yeah. And I made sure everybody I know is like aware, because like he's going to obviously come through
Right.
one of y'all, right? Like,
Right,
he's not
yeah,
going to
you're
like
one of your friends, Alec?
it has to be.
Yeah,
You
right.
had a hot friend for me, Alec? Come on. Yeah. And I think that was from the place that says, the same wounded, immature, masculine place that says like, I have to make this happen. So I have been in the process of connecting to God. I mean, that's like actually what's been going on, because if I'm not going to make it happen, and so much of the new age and manifestation, and I'm not throwing it all under the bus by any means, but so much of it is from this place of will based action. And if the thing hasn't happened, it's because you haven't done the manifestation right. You haven't organized your inner world right. You haven't, explored your shadow desires enough, right? And that clinging, that attachment, my coach would call it if then living, right? So if I have the man, then I will feel. Well, what will I feel? And what I started to recognize was the answer to that question was safe. I would feel safe if I had the right man. And I haven't ever felt that with, my chosen partners. Not because they are any kind of way, because I was not ready, right, to discern that. So in psychobiology, there's a term called neuroception, and it refers to your capacity to assess safety in your environment. When you're all jacked up in your trauma responses, you can see an intruder when it's a pile of laundry on a chair in your bedroom. And you and I know that this is how a lot of the activist world goes, right? Like we see scary things. We live in this virtual reality of horror when actually it's fucking fine where we are. And like, it's actually totally okay. And so that skewed perception plays out in romance all the time, right? And these, you can call them trauma bonds or imago-based relationships or, twin flames or whatever the hell you want to call it. We often find ourselves perceiving through our projections, let's say idealization initially, the promise of the love that we never experienced in our childhoods. And we go through this whole, journey. And those ruptures can be some of the most potent opportunities for self-reclamation and self-love. So when I understood that what I thought was on the other side of new partnership, when I understood that it was safety, I said, well, how do I offer this to myself? How is it here and now? So like initially I would do like silly things. Like I used to live in a house that had all windows in the back and I had a pool, and I would have like the dudes come clean the pool, but like at random times, and like hashtag Miami, then nobody speaks English. So like I said, I couldn't even really communicate with it. Right. So I would have like guys in my yard at random times. So I always felt like I had to be kind of like ready, clothed and ready. I don't know. And so a simple thing. How do I create more safety in my life right now? I make an arrangement with this company that they're going to text me 10 minutes before. That's it. Yeah. So how can I create more safety in my life now? How can I feel the safety that's already here? And that's what led me down this path of recognizing that there are psychological, there are somatic, and you could argue even spiritual ways to access safety as a woman that will provide the containment that you imagine can only come, and for good reason, you imagine this can only come from a man in your life or men in your life. Doesn't have to be your partner. And in doing so, you can begin to feel your own womanhood, right? So I, like so many women, started to imagine I needed to like chase femininity. Like, how do I learn how to be a feminine woman? How do I soften? How do I go to goddess circles? Do I take rose petal baths? Like, do I do special chants in the morning? Do I change my clothing? Like, do I grow long hair? Like, what are the women doing now? What are the feminine women doing, right? And that chasing is the same energy as fighting for our power as good feminists, right? So the fighting for power and the chasing femininity, I found, did not represent a departure from whatever that vigilant energy was that I was already in. And so this obsession that I developed with how to generate safety in my own body started to translate to my relationships. And my relationships began to feel way safer. My relationships with my parents and my brother, my relationships with, people I've had conflict with. And I started to be able to say the unsaid things. I started to have less and less turmoil in my life and tension. And then my relationship to activism and what was wrong in the world began to shift. And my experience of what I would even want out of partnership changed, right? And why I would even open to partnership, under what conditions. And so that was like the real plot twist for me. And that's what I teach. That's what the book is about. Is like the plot twist. The twist is that you don't have to learn how to be a feminine woman. You can learn how to confer safety to your system, and it will happen irrepressibly. That you access creativity and play and pleasure, and you start to feel what this vessel was designed for. Literally, your biology, because we have been pit against our biology as women. I mean, I know you have your story. You'll write a book about it one day, right? As a man, but I speak from this vantage point. Suppressing our emotions with antidepressants, taking birth control to hijack our cycles, medicalized birth, the messaging that says you are somehow free when you're serving a boss, but you're enslaved when you're serving your husband, that we will be respected when we use our head, but not when we lead with our heart. This war with men on the outside is just a holofractal experience of that war that's already taking place inside. You can heal it inside. You can establish that truce inside, and more, like the erotic dimensions of this complementarity inside, and it will mirror on the outside. I know people listening have had the experience, and I know you have too, of like doing this inner excavating, exploring, and transmuting, and just witnessing like people who do no work perhaps in our lives somehow changing, like something begins to shift.
Absolutely.
No family therapy, couples counseling, read this journal article required. And that has been really what shifted my priorities. And I would say probably like 4 or 5 months ago now, I had this like cataclysmic epiphany in my girlfriend's kitchen. I recorded a podcast about it, as you do, called Choosing Motherhood, where I recognized that I couldn't solve the riddle of how I was going to fit a man into my life with my daughters, right? Because I own my home, and we have this like jewel box, very feminine, like pink home, right? And I was like, okay, he's going to have to bring his like G.I. Joe blanket if he's coming over, because this is not the vibe. And then I was like, okay, well, maybe he's going to have his own house, and maybe we would move into his house. Ooh, I don't know if they want to do that. They're like super happy here. Or maybe I would like have 1 week here and then 1 week there. But what about my pets? And I just couldn't solve the riddle. I literally couldn't solve the riddle. And my girls, I think they would say they trust me at this point, right? And they know that they would be heavily consulted. If there's a piece of advice I would give to any woman who is dating or repartnering somebody other than the father of her kids, I would say, listen to your kids. Like really, really, really value. Don't coerce them into your perspective about your partner. But anyway, I couldn't figure it out. And I was with my girlfriend, who's 5 years my senior. Okay. My girls are going to be out of the house in 5 short years. Okay. And she is like hot as hell, totally vital, living her life. We have so much fun. We travel together. Okay. She's not like some decrepit menopausal hag. Okay. She's the age I'm going to be when my kids are going to be out of the house. And she also was and is an extremely devoted mother. Her kids are fucking awesome. And they're now out of the house, right? So they are living their lives and they're totally independent, but also they call her all the time. Like, it's just beautiful. She's an inspiration to me as a mom. And so I just had this moment where I was like, oh my God, I could choose the joy in front of me. I don't have to like secretly pine. And that's not to say that in my deepest heart, I don't yearn for this partnership. It's to say that my actual priorities right now are to choose my role as mother and the joy that is literally in front of me, which is my daughters, and to offer them my best effort at emotionally secure attachment in this very tender moment of their teen years, which we all know is the establishment, the foundation for the rest of your life you're going to experience with that parent. And that's when we try to say, hey, here's who I am. What do you think of that? And most of our parents are like, don't do that. Don't be you. Right. And then we're supposed to like feel any degree of interest in having this person in our lives. Right. And I just took myself formally off the market in that moment.
Wow.
You know, for the next 5 years at least. And I feel like it makes sense. I wouldn't even say like, I'm like, oh, this is no, it just makes sense. It makes sense. And I've also become very, very passionate as somebody who's twice divorced, very passionate about the potential that women have to transform their marriages. And you do not need couples therapy, and you do not need your man to go do trauma work, and you don't need him to go do ayahuasca. You don't need him to read the book. Okay. You have this power. And this is why, you know, a lot of my messaging these days is not always well received by other women. Totally get it. Because it's the same. I recognize it, right? It's like when I was told that and have been told that I victim shame women for taking antidepressants, let's say. Not everyone's ready for this, right? Like, right. It's cool. It's fine. It's not like the right moment for you, and it may never be the right moment. But
especially when people are still resolving their own victim story, totally understandable.
It's
when
not
you
the right
have
time.
been, quote, victimized at certain points in time, sure, like that makes sense to need to resolve that story.
100%.
Yeah.
And it may never make sense to try on this perspective. But for the women that I work with who are like ripe for a paradigm shift, the things that I share from my own lived experience feel like the ultimate aha. Like, it's like, oh my God, of course. That makes so much sense that I have been rejecting, disrespecting, and emasculating the man that I then want to be my king. Like, what the fuck am I doing? What's the other option? Right. Like, and again, as a curator, there are people who have, like Laura Doyle, for example, who have paved that path for us, should you want to walk it. And this path says you have this power already as a woman. You do not need to demand it. You don't need to coerce it. You don't need to, legislate it, right? You already have it. And here's how you wield it. It has some uncomfortable transitions, right? Like one of the things she teaches, for example, is duct tape, right? So you put duct tape over your mouth, like figuratively, right? AKA you like shut the fuck up, actually. So you just start to shut up. You start to shut up. You start to say less, pause more, breathe. Okay. And in those moments where you want to help, for me, my shadow is always like, I'm going to get you to see. Like if it had a banner, the banner would say, I'll get you to see the thing. I'll get you to understand. And I'm like real good at that. Okay. I could have been like slayed as an attorney. And that now I recognize whenever I'm trying to get someone to see, I am defeating my best intentions to secure what it is that in my heart I want. Right. Mm-hmm. So I am literally interfering with getting the thing. So this is not about, again, being a better person. This is not about like being kind. This is about, you say you want this thing. Here's actually how you get there. It's not always going to be comfortable, but it's going to get you to the place you say you want to go.
So you've talked about feminism a lot, and you talk about this power that women already wield. I want to get you to speak more plainly more directly rather, to the modern feminist movement that is. And, like I saw you share this the other day, and I'm not trying to go off on a tangent about Harrison Butker or any of that stuff, especially because you texted me and you're like, I don't even know what an NFL kicker is.
Don't ask me what an NFL kicker is. I was like, this is what he is. No more questions, please.
But you watched his speech and he was talking about traditional roles for the masculine and feminine. And you
The
said
diabolical lies women have been told.
Yeah.
I like a little poetry in my
Yeah, no, I mean,
commencement speech.
It was great.
Yeah.
And so, and you said that you had come to the same conclusions that he had come to without
On
any
that
of,
subject, yeah.
Yeah, on that subject specifically, without any of the same, life experience or role as a man or a Christian or, Catholic in his case, whatever. I think right-leaning, whatever he is, doesn't matter. But the point is, you being almost diametrically opposed to what his lifestyle is, especially NFL athlete, came to the same conclusion about the diabolical lies women have been told. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I shared is, as a pedigreed medical doctor, a New York Times bestseller, a 7-figure business owner, and a single mom. So I have that extra little kick of martyrdom in there. I know what it's like to enjoy the fruits of feminism that say I can do what a man can do bleeding. And I am here to report that the fulfillment that was promised through these achievements, which is essentially what he was suggesting as well, is hollow relative to the fulfillment that I experience and have been detailing for the greater part of the last, 45 minutes as a mother. And if I were, partnered, which again is something I strongly advocate for now, is do whatever the fuck you can do, ladies, to stay with the father of your children. I believe that passionately. And I look back on my story and I'm like, clearly it had to be this way. You guys would be missing like a lot of books if I didn't like go on my journey.
Where would the medicine have come from for others to reflect on that?
I mean, whatever.
Right.
It's a futile inquiry to say like, what would it have been like to have the tools that I now know are available. And, the father of my kids is like, I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed. I don't think I could have handled what some of my girlfriends handle, which is like to be in that level of trauma bond with the father of your kids. So I'm not saying like it's always available. I don't know, but I do know that we have power that is worth accessing to just do whatever you can. Because the experience of that family and the experience of organized complementary energies in romantic partnership is a fulfillment that we can reframe as women. And so all those accolades I mentioned, and I could list off many more. I mean, literally when I got the call about my first book being a New York Times bestseller, I remember where I was. I was in my office in Manhattan, and I felt like what I call like a clitoral sneeze. Like it was just like, oh my God, that's so cool. And then I moved on. I felt nothing else.
Wow.
That was like literally it. And every time, and I've heard other, teachers talk about this. I don't know if you've experienced it. It's like such a fleeting, like little blip on the radar when you get the thing, when you achieve the thing.
Totally.
Right. And David Data teaches men that understanding the nature, if I could paraphrase, like the nature of the success failure cycle is a part of what you're here to get good at, right? Because you're never, ever, ever going to reach that completion point where you have achieved all the things. And if you have reached that, it's time to burn it all up and start over, right? So that game for women, which we are enculturated to play, is ultimately rooted in, this is my opinion and perspective, in self-betrayal, right? Because for me to mimic the very men that I have not admitted to myself I am fundamentally afraid of, I have not worked on that daddy stuff, let's say, and I have not owned that I am walking in this biologically vulnerable vessel, terrified that if I do a man wrong, if I displease him, if I misplace my sexual energy, I will be punished, right? That is the fertile soil for the colonization of masculine values. And what I mean by that is that we took on, it's like the hegemony of masculine values. We took that on. We allowed ourselves to be colonized by that. And in doing so, we made the poor bargain. We sold our authenticity, our wildness, our very bodies to the corporatocracy so that what? I can have poorer women's bodies raising my children so that I can be a cog in the corporate industrial, machinery so that I can buy more things that promise me I will feel better when I buy them. This is what I incarnated for. Then as somebody who arguably has, right? Because you can still tell yourself like, oh, it's coming soon when you're like in that hustle as a woman. But I've gotten to this place, where I have achieved the things.
You've quote made it.
I've made it. And I've made it. And of course, I don't believe in accidents. I don't believe this is a problem. Like it's just the inflection point of feminism. Like it's in its quiescence. Like neoliberal feminism, it's done. It's achieved its purpose. And I could get, metaphysical about what I think its purpose is, which is to summarize, and again, I'm a huge David Data fan. So I think a lot through like his teachings. I've been studying his work for over a decade. And, he talks about the stages of masculine and feminine development. And he's like the only one who's not annoying when he uses the terms masculine and feminine. Pretty much he's allowed to. And, the first stage is like, I need this. I'm going to get mine. Okay. So like perhaps that was earlier phases of human development and this, sort of like this non-consensual domination and, and rape and violation and betrayal and all of these things. And I would make the argument, as many do, that when we as women say we have been subjected to all of these horrors and forget that the majority of men have as well, okay, just look at the stats. Men lead, by and large, merciless existences exposed to violence and man-on-man crime and war and suicide and all the things. And if we take that little 1% upper crust of men who are pulling some sorts of strings, we're all subjected. Okay. Right. So that aside, if we were to develop and evolve beyond that into this second stage. So he talks about the second stage is when you balance out to the extent that you understand how to meet your own needs, right? And that requires knowing that you have needs. All right. So in a relationship, that's like the new age couple who's like, honey, I don't appreciate when you speak to me that way. And here's what I would need. I would need you to, set aside a time where we can speak more, and that is like often about the least hot dynamic available, right? So it's not polarized. What he would say, it's not polarized dynamic. But how do you get there? It's maturational. So perhaps the new age and feminism have feminized men, right? So encouraging men to feel their feelings, grow their hair long, do their yoga, and to subdue their healthy aggression, put it in some sort of box for now, right? And masculinized women, right? So this neutralization has allowed for the integration of the anima and animus, if you want to use Jungian terms, like where I feel I will never know what it's like to feel like a man. Mm. I don't have any idea, but I feel this signature energy that allows me to make clear decisions, follow through on my word, to execute plans, to solve problems. And I can access that now. And I can see its fruits because I'm in the workplace and I can be a corporate baddie, just like the dudes and bros. And I can choose now, which energy do I want to play in? Right? So I can be in my so-called masculine running my business, and then I can, put on a song and dance or take a bath and transition into my body so that I can become this transmitting vessel for my husband. 3 hours later, I can choose how to play with my own energy. And perhaps that next stage we are entering as a collective, 1000% required all the psyops, right? All the Rockefeller funded social agendas and every aspect of what has been engineered to inflame our victimhood so that we can get to this place where we find devotional complementarity, where we find what it is to have this sacred union within and seek it without. We remember like what we came here to do as man and woman, and not just in erotic partnership, but literally on this plane. Because I may say I'm never having, and I'm not saying this, hello, that I'm never having sex with a man again. I may say, just write men off, but I still walk this plane with men. And that's something to reconcile. So I have not seen any of the many, many, many disparate branches of feminism speak to how we restore relations, right? How do we find this road forward, this way forward? Through the psychology, it's not available, right? Because most feminism insists that men owe us an apology, that they are the root of our problems, and that is fundamentally a self-rejection and self-betrayal, because not only do you have a father, you're half your father, right. But, energetically, this is something to reconcile. And finding those differences was an important stage. And it's done now, gals. Like it's done, and you can stay there if you want. But the most bitter bitches I know hate men. And I was one of those. Okay. I know that place, that stance. I mean, I was a feminist my entire life and never really a political person, but I identified strongly with this righteous sense of watch me and competition, not conscious, but competition with men. And then this like desperate frustration and exasperation when they would let me down, disappoint me, or do it worse than I could have. That is a terrible world to live in. I don't want to live in that world anymore. And I don't. And one of the great points of transition for me was inspired by one of my BDSM teachers and coaches, Omer Pani, who taught me this phrase, don't speak ill of men. I was like, what does that mean? Right. And he talks about how this is what we do as women. We henpeck, right? Like we get together and we shit talk our exes, and we, shit talk any man around, and we shit talk our husbands. And then we live in a world with shitty men, right? It's like, if you're right and your husband is wrong, you're married to like a loser that you chose. That's problematic psychically. That's cognitive dissonance. Like there's no resolution to, unless you decide I'm going to show respect, appreciation, and admiration to every man I encounter. Like, what would that be like? That also means that you're more likely to ask for help and to offer men the opportunity to feel purposeful and needed, which I understand is kind of something you're into, right? And it is an organizing practice. And when I say organizing, I mean that it allows a woman to be a woman and a man to be a man. And that exhale that we get to experience as women is the portal through which we can access our feminine energy. And that's why it's not ever going to be just like allopathy. Like the cure was never for sale in the hospital, right? Like the experience of femininity through feminism, it's not for sale there. So where is it for sale? And I often use this phrase, probably, it's time to retire it too, but where are you trying to buy eggs from the hardware store? right? So you want to feel free, right? That's what we were promised. This is how you feel free as a woman. You've been enslaved. You've been, oppressed and subjugated and violated and abused. And now you will feel free. I'm not sure that's what we ever wanted. That's a masculine virtue, freedom. That's what data teaches, right? We want to feel love. And to feel that, we have to feel safe. And so if safety isn't for sale through feminism, can't be, because we're at war with the very faction of society that can offer us that, then where do we shop for it? And because I'm interested in radically empowering practices, it's kind of cool that you can shop for it first. Like right here,
Man, there's so many more things that I want to discuss during this, but we've already gone like 2 hours. No, that's not even that. I'm trying to because I wanted you to go into like what you think are. Okay, do this real quick, just in summary, and then we'll wrap up. Like, what do you think are the most appropriate? It's hard to find the right words. What do you think are the most aligned?
That's never the right word.
I know.
I'm kidding.
It's just not there though in that context. Most aligned roles for the masculine and the feminine, because especially for those of us who realize that something is wrong with society, and for the many women who listen to this podcast, it's like I have been told so many conflicting stories, even amongst the consciousness, new age, spirituality, holistic health, sovereignty crowds. There's conflicting narratives, but what is the role of the feminine? What is the role of the masculine? Briefly.
Yeah. I wouldn't pretend to know the answer to that. I can just speak from my experience and my observation, again, as somebody who was provider, protector, still working on those two roles. I still am those things. Okay. For my kids, as someone who imagined that there was some kind of, spiritual, emotional pot of gold at the end of the rainbow of my mission, my purpose, and my career, my vocation, as somebody who has very strong masculine competencies, right? Like I don't need a man. I really don't. Do I need men? Yes. Would I be, this house wouldn't exist without, right? Like when I walk around the world, because as somebody used to be like, I don't need men. I will walk around the world and have an experience of the world these days where I'm like, wow, y'all build some amazing shit.
Right.
You fix all of it when it breaks.
Right.
Right. And a story that always makes me tear up that I share in the book is I have this handyman who's been a house husband for many years. He's supported me as I've lived alone, right? And he's just the best. He's runs security for me at my events. And anyway, he's great. And he was telling me how his son is looking into becoming a welder. I don't know if you know anything about welding. Okay.
One
I don't.
My friend is a welder.
Okay. So right? And he said it's pretty lucrative, but it's super dangerous. Okay. And so I was telling him, I was like, wow, I'm like, should he just start a digital company? It's a way safer thing to do. No, but I'm like, wow. And I told him, I said, I just appreciate how dangerous so many of these jobs that you guys do are. I never thought about that before. I mean, I might have looked at a construction site and be like, whoa, he's really high up there. How the hell is he not scared? But I really didn't allow myself to appreciate it. And I said that, and he looked at me and he's like, we do it all for you. And it was just this it was like a remembrance. It was a deep moment in my life. Just that simple interaction where I was like, we just have to be as women. We just be. I just wake up and be. And it inspires men around me to do extraordinary things. That's the complementarity. So how do we, I'm not saying live that in every moment, I'm some protoplasmic, moment of oneness. No, I'm saying like, how do we just touch that a little bit? How do we remember that and bring that remembrance like into our daily grind? It seems to me like if it is not on my plate as a woman to provide and take care of what I call masculine money, right? Paying the damn bills, the car lease, the shit, right? As a single woman, I earn masculine money. So I have structures in my business, recurring revenue, that keep the lights on, okay? Not only for my business, but in my literal home. And then I get to play in the spiral world of non-linear feminine money, where I invest $140,000 of my savings into Audacious Embodiment, an event that I put on just because I fucking wanted to. And it was worth every penny. Okay. Like, so that is like, who knows what's going to happen? I'm going to invest in this training, this mentorship, and maybe it'll be amazing. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm going to just like follow my whims. Okay. So that's the feminine dimension of my relationship to money. If you have a man, for him to take all that off your plate, so he is in the realm of problem solving, securing, and being ignited in his capacity to like vision forward for you both, because that's what he's literally built for. It's not that we can't do it. I'm doing it, but that's what he's built for. I imagine I can solve problems better than you, but I actually think the truth is like, I can't. I actually think the truth is that when you are given that responsibility fully, you actually do it better than me. Okay. And that's humbling, because I have imagined for a long time that I am a better problem solver than almost every man. Like I literally will like I still kind of catch myself sometimes doing it. Which is why even I was talking to you about this podcast earlier, and I was like, God, it feels so good that you're the expert on this. And I get to just like let you be. I'm like, I don't have any suggestions to make. You know what I'm saying? Because I have such a habit of being like, oh, here's how you should be running your business better, man. Okay. So if he takes that off of your plate of attention and you still want to run a business, you still want to create, it will be from your soul. It will be from a totally different origin point. Okay. And you get to have the experience of appreciating and respecting and trusting this man to guide and lead you. Okay, so many women will be like, well, I don't trust this man. He's shown me he can't. Like when I put him in charge of the bills, like the lights go out. So I have to help. Or he can't support us, so I have to contribute. And I have many girlfriends who've been inspired by my work who have done this work. And I will tell you, there is a leap. There's a leap, and it could be a little crunchy for a minute. But after that moment of choosing to trust, it's a choice. Choosing to respect, it's a choice, right? And playing that part of the woman who actually has chosen the right man. Because again, you don't have to stay, right? It's like get into it or get out of it, okay? And you're playing that part and he rises. I've seen it over and over and over again, right? And maybe you can relate. He rises, and then you get to exhale and you get to be in your intuitive, creative, playful, body-led experience of life. Again, whether you choose to work, whether you choose to be a stay-at-home mom, I hate that phrase, whether you choose to like never have kids and garden in the backyard, your experience of your own body and your channeling of your energy will be this beacon for him. That is the complementarity. And again, people teach it better than I, just have explained, like Data, I would say. But it is a remembrance. And when we touch on it, when we get there, there is an enthusiasm for what's possible. And it requires the sacrifice of so many of these diabolical lies we've been told.
That was so well said. I think you did a pretty good job. I know Data. I know
Working
Data.
on it.
You're a big fan, but clearly
I'm a big fan.
you're very good, like you said, at taking large concepts and distilling them down so other people can understand. And I'd imagine that's what you do with the Reclaimed Woman. You've taken all of these things that we've discussed on this episode and all of the things that you've directly experienced. I mean, that's what this episode was you just sharing like your experience over the last 3 years and beyond and what's worked for you to help you reclaim those parts of yourself.
And extraordinary women. Like I like to call it, who've held a hand out in the dark to me. Like there are extraordinary women I have manifested who have shown me the way and reminded me that I already knew it. So I showcase their teachings, and the intention is for this to be like the record scratch, like this book, like for this to be the experience of like that change point, that inflection point. And it won't be that if you're not ready, but I know that it will be because I've seen it. I have, women walking, telling the tale of it. Just sometimes requires the sense making out of your persistent struggles and the permission to choose differently. And I will say the funny thing about writing a book about this that's intended to be, on that order of like a one-stop shop for your empowerment as a woman, right? And that there's not a lot of women who take this into the health arena and the erotic arena, right? Like, so I do fancy myself like a bit of a unique mouthpiece because what I've found is in the feminine reclamation world. Oh, wow. Just the masks and jabs abound.
Oh yeah.
It's amazing. And in the health world, there's a lot of discomfort, with the direction that I've gone in, and that's cool. And
a thing that's interesting on that, and I don't want to get off on a huge tangent, but I meant to say this earlier, is like in yogic traditions, even in some like Chinese traditions, your animating energy, like you said, comes from your sexual energy, and that is what animates and gives you life force. That is like
where we come from,
right?
It's
exactly,
where
yeah,
we come from.
Right. So it is interesting that there's so much shame surrounding that in our culture, and I think it's great what you're doing because you're bridging those two worlds, because that's what gives us that vitality, that
it's
life
anti-life.
force.
I mean, it's so Joel Schaefer, who we both know, right? Like he talks to me. I had him on my podcast, and we talked about conception, right? Like how many of us know like the dirty details of how like the sex that occurred, if there was sex these days, right? Like, so the sex that occurred to conceive us, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, was it hot? Was it violent? Was it like, what he says Castaneda calls like a bored fuck? Like what actually went on? And the patterning, the ripple effect of that imprint on the rest of your life is very real. Who's even thought about that, right?
Yeah,
it's like fascinating.
Crazy.
So
and it makes sense though,
unless you remember that we are meant to come from sex, that's literally, our origin story, it won't make a lot of sense why our erotic energy is synonymous with our vital force and why we have been pit against it. It's the ultimate psyop, I think, right? So that assault on not only our own impulses, our own, right? So but it also, the man-woman dyad that we're seeing come under fire, so to speak. But yeah, I was just saying that it's a funny thing to write a book about this because unlike health stuff, right? So there are people who have read A Mind of Your Own or Own Yourself, and they have done the protocol and they've gotten off the meds and walked into a new story about their health really on their own. But this work, this shame related work, this identification as like a woman, right? So this is not about like, oh, my brain chemistry or my pancreas, or, this is like your essence. It requires, in my opinion, other women. And what I learned from Omrapani is that women, and it made so much sense. He's like, how women go to the bathroom together, like at the club, right? So we, in groups, we confer safety to each other. That's why I always tell my daughters, you always stick together, like always be with another gal. Like that is womaning 101, right? You roll with your girls. And that initial experience of safety allows for the imprinting of a kind of approval, if it's the right container, of course, that helps invite you into what it feels like to offer that to yourself. So what would it be like to offer radical, radical, radical approval to every dimension of yourself, including the parts of yourself that absolutely love the shitstorm of your life, right? Like the parts of yourself that,
are addicted to chaos.
Yes. And that actually, like, that have very benevolent intent and seem to be a huge problem, right? So what would it be to just approve of all of it? That's how I've become like quite a moral relativist, and why I don't fit into a lot of dualistically oriented religious conversations where there's a savior outside and a sinner outside, right? What if, because I like this path, it feels good to just explore the possibility that I have all of it in me. Okay. So that work done with other women, it can happen in hours. I mean, for me, it happened in like, one dance session, one conversation, like one encounter with a woman who just gave me a little bit of permission to be somebody different than I had been. So to write a book about this, it's like, yeah, read it, but like read it with a girlfriend or something. Like, I don't even know if you should read it alone. And of course, that's why, now I've created like a lot of my energy is around creating these containers.
You're doing a container for this book too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One time. So I'm going to commit to, like, in July, we're doing, I have a program, of course, as you do. Although this is actually my second program in 10 years. So VMR is the first and here's the second, because I sell many other things, but, and I designed it with the same intention. Like, you do this and you're different, right? Like this is not just sort of like journaling to journal, no. And so I will hold this container, for the 6 weeks. And then, I intend to create a free, and then like following honestly in your footsteps, and winner, and, folks who I haven't really offered that, like a accessible community, and then a more intensive community for women who are on this path, because otherwise there will be like a sister-in-law or a social media comment or whatever that will induce the somnolence again, right? Like it'll make it harder to remember, like why it's 1000% worth moving through these uncomfortable, tight squeezes of being wrong and bad in order to claim that aliveness on the other side.
Everything you said during this whole episode, again, just going back to what I said a little bit ago, just sounds like reclamation. I know that may sound like I'm trying to gas you up because that's the title of your book, but I'm serious though. It's like, it's no longer allowing that victimhood story to perpetuate inside of you, and no longer seeking outside of yourself for the things that can be derived internally. Like, yes, there are some things that you need outside of you, right, to live in this plane of existence, but it's really questioning how much of that we're giving away that can be derived internally. And that's
that's the thing. Like when you say reclamation, when I would say reclamation, I would think like, yeah, take it back, reclaim it. Right. But that's again, the twist. It's like, you just own it.
Yeah.
You own it. There's nothing to take back, but the owning it is not like, oh yeah, I'm a queen. Right. It's like, yeah, I can be a real fucking asshole sometimes.
Right.
And, there are people who fall more on that self-smalling side. Many of us have our moments. And so maybe owning it is like, yeah, I have so much like divinity channeling, right? So it's like owning the full spectrum, and especially in the moments where you're more identified with one energetically, right? So you're self-idealizing or self-vilifying. How do you play into the tension of the opposites in a given moment? It's really not that hard. But again, when you have other women normalizing this with you, it just becomes like a way of being. And that's how I live. And without that, I just don't know in a vacuum. It's just it would not be possible.
Yeah. Got it. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining me. This was awesome. And what date does the book come out again?
June 25th.
June 25th. Okay. So this will air on June 9th, 10th-ish. So roughly 2 weeks. All that'll be in the show notes. Yeah. You've played an important role in my family's life, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, thanks for coming on my magic carpet ride with me. It means a lot to me. Thank you.